take the horn out, put the mouthpiece in, set the horn on your lap, close your eyes, and breathe slowly through your nose and count your breaths. Try to count from 1 to 10 without losing your place. You'd be surprised how difficult it is.
This episode contains adult language and adult humor. Since when have trumpet players ever been considered adults? If you are easily offended by these types of conversations, consider switching to the oboe. Welcome to the Trumpet Gurus Hang podcast. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. My guest for this episode is Michael Bogart. Michael Bogart is a master of the pivot. Michael's life has navigated a number of twists and turns that took him from the military to the road with Maynard Ferguson. After a 9-year stint as the lead trumpet for the legendary Tower of Power, Michael found himself on a journey back to the Navy, back to school, and back to his deeper spiritual calling. And now he's preparing for a new chapter that has him heading back to Cali. So, pour yourself a big glass, pull up a chair, and let the hang begin. Welcome to this episode of the Trumpet Gurus Hang, and we are once again going across the ocean to London, where I'm going to be talking with Michael Bogart. Michael, good to see you, my man.
Good to see you too, Jose. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm honored to be part of this.
Oh well, the honor is all mine. You have led a tremendous life. I mean, you're still a young man. No pun intended there, but well, maybe we'll get to that.
Never heard that one before.
Never heard it. No, you still have a lot of years ahead of you, my friend, and you've had an interesting journey so far. And for people who don't know about Michael is just going to share with you this amazing journey. And to me, it's super, super impressive because I'm a firm believer in the power of pivoting. And he's made some tremendous pivots. And so any of you who are watching this show and contemplating making some changes in your life, whether it's into music or out of music or whatever it is, I think you're going to get some inspiration from this episode. So let's just kind of...
Just to be clear, when you talk about pivot, we're not talking about Reinhardt, right?
No, I'm not talking about. Yeah, I'm not talking about the pivot system. No, although I am a Type 4, I am a downstream or upstream player. I'm an upstream player. Yeah, so I do that pivot, and we will talk some gear. So before you tune out, ladies and gentlemen, yes, indeed, there will be a little bit of talk about gear and high notes. So don't lose faith. This is a trumpet podcast, by the way. So anyway, let's kind of set the stage. Michael, you I didn't realize this. You went to Interlochen.
I did. I was fortunate enough in my sophomore year in high school. I grew up in a very small rural farming community in Michigan, and during the summers I was lucky enough to be able to attend Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp because it was close by my home where I grew up, but. There really wasn't a whole lot happening musically in the town that I grew up in. I mean, it was a rural area. There were, a population at that time of, I think, about 2,400. And really the only reason why music existed in the public school system at all was to support the football program. Yeah. It's changed. It's gotten better now. But at the time that I was going there wasn't a whole lot happening. So, Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp really kind of saved me and gave me my introduction to jazz. And then it was through contacts with Blue Lake that I found out about the Interlochen Arts Academy. And when I was a sophomore in high school, I had a chance to audition, and I won the audition, and I got a scholarship. And so I finished out my last 2 years of high school at Interlochen. And that really kind of musically set the stage for the rest of my life. Musically, I can't downplay that enough. I can't emphasize that enough, how important it was at that phase in my development as a trumpet player to be able to get thrown into that kind of environment. Because I was pretty much self-taught I would have lessons during the summer at Blue Lake, but I didn't have anybody I was studying with. So, a lot of what I was doing was self-taught. And it wasn't until I got to Interlochen that I was really able to sit down and start developing a normal daily trumpet routine and things of that nature, and kind of decide what kind of direction I wanted to go into musically.
Yeah. There's been some tremendous talent that's come out of Interlochen. And were there any cats that you were with there that you've maintained a relationship over the years with?
Yeah, I've stayed in touch. At the time that I was there, we had a really, really solid trumpet studio. Walter White had just graduated like a year ahead of me, so his presence was still very much
The presence of Walter, yes, permeates all.
Yeah. And I was classmates with an amazing trumpet player named Jason Carter, who's been he's been with Yanni for many, many years, but he plays incredible jazz. He plays great classical music and plays great lead too. I mean, Jason is just like one of those all around cats. And then there were also, we had some really great classical trumpet players there, and that was what my main focus was on when I got there. And when I graduated from Interlochen, I wanted to be an orchestral trumpet player. So my senior year, I was finally able to make it into the orchestra, and I played co-principal to a trumpet player whose name is James Stevenson, who's now a very well-known brass composer, and he's written some amazing brass music. He wrote the piece that the Chicago Symphony Orchestra played as a tribute when the great Adolf Herseth and Bud Herseth passed away a number of years ago. They commissioned Jim to compose the piece that they performed in Bud's memory, because Bud was obviously a huge influence on all us trumpet players, all brass players that were growing up in the 1970s and 1980s and even earlier.
Right.
And even still today.
Yeah, absolutely. They're the Chicago sound, man. There's nothing like that. But that was interesting to me because my knowledge of you, my experience of you, was definitely more in the jazz and commercial music standings, and I didn't realize that you were the legit master there for a number of years.
Hardly a legit master. I was lucky enough to get accepted into a couple of different schools. I auditioned for Eastman. I did not get accepted. I wasn't good enough to get into Eastman. I did get accepted into the New England Conservatory, and I also got accepted into the University of Miami. And at that time, the trumpet professor there was Gilbert Johnson, who has since passed away. But Gilbert was the principal trumpet of the Philadelphia Symphony for all those years when Eugene Ormandy was a conductor, and Gil made some really landmark recordings with the Philly. So I was kind of torn. In the end, what decided it for me was what eventually decided my career for me was it must have been like the last semester of Interlochen. And I mean, I was like all gun ho to just, throw myself into the classical world. And then Maynard Ferguson came to the Interlochen Arts Academy and performed. And I remember sitting there. I was sitting next to Jason Carter at the gig, in the performance,
right,
and just being absolutely just like blown away by this wall of sound, and walking away from that going, maybe that's what I want to do. So the seed had already been planted by that point.
Right.
So I ended up choosing the University of Miami because Miami had a really, really strong jazz department. And I kind of thought, well, if the classical thing, and for whatever reason, I wanted to go to some place that had, not that New England Conservatory didn't have a jazz program, they had a big band, but the University of Miami, of course, their reputation preceded itself for their jazz program. So I ended up going to the University of Miami.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's funny because, like, for me, when I graduated from high school, my original major wasn't music; it was actually biochemistry, and I gotten accepted at a number of universities, and I was down between two. One was Harvard, and the other was Ohio State. And I was living in Ohio at the time, and it was, do I go to Harvard or do I go to Ohio State? And
wow, tough call, man.
My decision was to go to Ohio State, and it was for two reasons. One, I could live with my sister and not have to pay room and board. So even though I had a free ride for that first year. It was I was solid for that. But it's like, well, I really haven't been away from my family that much. So, I would feel much more comfortable transitioning that first year of school, being with my family. But then the second thing was that, Ohio State had a great music program. So it was the same thing. It's like, I'm spending a lot of time playing and gigging and things like that. And I really would like to play music as well as do my studies. So I want to be someplace that I have that opportunity. And then, of course, after a year, I switched to music. So, it worked out in the end. But it's funny how sometimes and I think this is going to be the theme of that we talk about today is, you start out with an idea in mind, but there's kind of a seed that's planted in you, and you come to this point of making a decision. And sometimes it's that seed, that thing that you didn't think was that important at the moment. It pops up and goes, no, you need to keep the door open for this, because this is eventually going to be a very crucial part of your life. So, we've gotten you down to Miami, and I know you ended up in the Navy after that. Were you you were stationed in California?
Not at first. I joined the Navy in 1988. I didn't finish up at the University of Miami, which is also part of my story, part of my journey. I got in. I was partying too much, and I ended up losing my scholarship and put on academic probation, and then just finally getting to the point where I just couldn't see myself being able to finish. So I went back home with my tail between my legs, and I didn't have a whole lot of options at that point. And we found out that that the military had bands that you could audition and play in. And the closest band geographically to where we were at was the Navy band at Great Lakes, ironically enough, where I ended up finishing my career. And so I auditioned for the Navy music program. That was in 1988. After graduating Musicians A School, which was in Little Creek, Virginia, which is everybody goes to that after boot camp. The first band I went to was actually in Guam. And we don't have that band anymore. Unfortunately, it was lost to cuts. Mm-hmm. But that was a lot of fun. I was in Guam for I think about 4 years, and then I was transferred to Yokosuka, Japan, which is I think about 40 kilometers south of Yokohama, something like that. And so I was in Japan for 5 years, and then I ended up in San Diego. And by that point, I did 1 year with the Navy band. At that time, it was called the Navy Band San Diego. Now it's called Navy Band Southwest, I think. But I did 1 year there, and I hit the 10-year mark. And I kind of had to make a decision at that point if I wanted to stay in and finish, or if I wanted to get out. And again, we talk about these crossroads and trying to be open to possibilities and suggestions, and trying to listen to our inner voice and inner guide. And when I was in Japan, I had a chance to hook up with trumpet player who you've had on your show, Eric Miyashiro, who's a very good friend of mine. In fact, he gave me this for recording his first album.
Oh, nice.
And Eric and I had known each other from way back when he was still on Buddy's band. That was when we first met. But fast forward, he had been living in Japan for a number of years, was already like the number one, studio trumpet player, and had just starting to put together his first big band. And I got there and I phoned him up and I said, "Hey man, I'm living in Japan." And so he started calling me for gigs, for studio work, and also to play lead in his big band. So it was from that experience that led to when I stayed in Japan about as long as you can possibly stay, because I didn't want to leave. And plus I had also, at that point I was married, and we had just had a child. She was a couple of years old. And I kind of wanted to be stable and stay in one place, but the Navy, they got to move you around. So I stayed there as long as I could. And finally the Navy said, you gotta head back to the United States. But Eric made, some calls on my behalf, and he had been on Buddy Rich's band with a great trombone player named Tom Garling.
Right.
And Tom was the musical director on Maynard Ferguson's band. So he contacted Tom and said, hey, there's this great trumpet player who's going to be in San Diego. If you guys are coming through town and you need a sub or whatever, please don't hesitate to call him. And that's exactly what happened. The Maynard's band was playing in Fallbrook, north of San Diego, and they needed a sub, and they called me, and I subbed, and it was from getting to sub with them a couple of times as Carl Fisher's replacement that ended up I was offered the gig full time. And so at that point, plus not to get ahead of myself, I had also had an opportunity to audition for Tower of Power, which I did not get the gig at that time, but I came in second. So based on the offer from Maynard Ferguson's band, based on the fact that I was able to come in second in the Tower of Power audition, I decided at that point I had reached the end of my enlistment. I was at the 10-year point, and I figured, you know what, if I'm going to take the jump and try to make it in the civilian music world, I need to do it now, or I'm never going to do it. And so I decided not to re-enlist, and I got out of the Navy and joined Maynard Ferguson's band.
Yeah. How long were you with Maynard?
A year and a half. So I joined just over a year. I joined in 1998. I couldn't tell you what month. Let's see, I left the band after a little over a year. And then there were a couple of months where I was just kind of freelancing in San Diego. And then Tower of Power called me. The guy who'd won the audition, my predecessor, Jesse McGuire, had been on the band for about a year and some change. And Jesse decided he wanted to move on and do some other things. So they kept me on their Rolodex, and the main, one of the reasons why I didn't get the job in the first place was because my resume was literally one line. It was, 10 years with the United States Navy Band.
Right.
And Jesse's resume was like Four Tops, Temptations, all these great national acts.
Right.
So, after Jesse decided to leave, they called me up. And actually, it was Doc Kupka who called me, and it was, they were wondering what I'd been doing for the last year. And I said, well, actually, I've been touring with Maynard Ferguson's band for the last year. And they said, perfect. Do you want the job? And I was like, yes.
So was Adolfo was on the road with you with Maynard's band, correct?
He was, yeah. Adolfo was playing. It was funny because our roles were reversed.
Right.
Adolfo, he was playing the lead book on Maynard's band, and I came in and I was playing the so-called jazz book, the second book, which is really more. I mean, I think I had like one solo a night or two solos maybe, and then the big thing for the second book was during the hit medley, you had to play all of Maynard's parts. So like MacArthur Park and, all that other stuff. So,
right.
You had to be a jazz player, but it was probably more important that you could, do a good Maynard impression, which at that time I could still do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Adolfo and we were on the band together for a year. And then after I had been on Tower of Power for 6 months, the other trumpet player on Tower of Power, Bill Churchville, who had been on the band at that point, I think he'd been on the band for about 7 years. Bill decided to leave the road and focus on his studio career in Los Angeles, which has been going great. So they asked me for a recommendation. I said, yeah, there's this trumpet player on Maynard Ferguson's band who he and I, like, from day one just gelled and played really well together, and he'd be a great addition. He's a great hang, a great human being. And I recommended Adolfo, and they hired him based on my recommendation, which was really cool. So we were reunited and we were together. Obviously, he's still on the band, so we were together the whole time I was on Tower of Power.
Yeah, that's great. Now let's hang with the Maynard thing for a bit. I've been fortunate. Maynard was definitely one of the first trumpet players that I heard. Really the first player that I heard that made me completely change my concept of what trumpet playing could be, and the sound, the presence, all that sort of stuff. But then after years of following him, and I've gotten to be good friends with a lot of people that have played on that band. The thing that's impressed me more than his ability to play the trumpet was Maynard is the human being, and everyone from Walter, Kenny Robinson, Wayne Bergeron, Roger Ingram, Adolfo, everybody I've talked to that's been in that band, they say how there have been moments in that band where the that deep spiritual nature of Maynard has helped them to get through problems that they had either on the stage or off stage, and have a better concept of how life really worked. I mean, do you have any moments that you can look at and say, yeah, there was a definite influence more than just the trumpet in terms of how Maynard affected your life?
Absolutely. First of all, just his energy. He had this amazing positive energy that I'm sure everybody who you've talked to before who's been on the band, like Wayne and Roger and Adolfo would attest to. We could pull the longest, like a 17-hour bus ride right into a hit, and Maynard would be the first guy, jumping off the bus going, "Come on, guys, let's go play." He was just so enthusiastic and so full of energy, positive energy all the time. I never saw him get quiet. I never saw him get dark. I certainly never saw him get angry. And nothing but positive energy. The other big takeaway, and I was just thinking about this while you were talking, which is a really bad habit, but I was trying to think, okay, what's he going to ask?
Yeah.
I think it was the first night after I got hired full time. Maynard, it's the only time that he gave any like direct advice. But he came up to me, and it was like right before the hit, and he welcomed me to the band, and was looking forward to having me. And he said, "I only have one piece of advice that I give every new musician who joins my band. Well, two pieces of advice. Sorry." He said, "Don't keep score on the rest of your bandmates. Don't keep score on yourself." And obviously he was talking about keeping musical score.
Right.
So and so missed a note tonight. Clocking that one in my memory bank.
Yeah.
Or the worst and most common enemy, especially for trumpet player, for me anyways, is keeping score on myself. Oh shoot, I really messed that lick up. Something like that. Or I start more lately because I've been more focusing on improvisation. I start a solo and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going with this idea.
Yeah, right.
Okay, back to minor pentatonics, the Freddie Hubbard lick number one, and it's then afterwards, it's like ruminating about all the things that went wrong. But that advice, don't keep score on others, don't keep score on yourself, has so many applications across the board for just life in general. And really it kind of boils down to, I know he was really deep into meditation. I wish I'd had a chance to, because I didn't know anything about meditation, wasn't interested in it at the time that I was on the band. I've since it's become part of my spiritual journey. I wish I'd had an opportunity to talk to him and ask him about it, but it was obvious that a comment like that is coming from a place of be in the moment now. Don't be spending all your mental energy thinking about something that happened in the past, even if it was just a few minutes ago, and certainly don't expend any mental energy or start writing fiction about what could or could not happen in the future,
right?
Because it hasn't happened yet. Be as present as you possibly can in the moment. And he just, without even talking about it, just from his presence, that's how he lived. That's how he lived his life.
Yeah. And that is the biggest influence. It's there's so many people that are really good at talking the talk, but it's the people that live that, and you don't have to necessarily preach it, but I don't want to beat up all these metaphors and stuff, but actions do speak louder than words, and you look at someone like Maynard, and certainly he was not a perfect trumpet player. Just as I'm sure he wasn't a perfect person, because none of us are perfect. We strive towards being our best version of ourselves, but that's how you get to be the best version of yourself. Is you push your boundaries, and pushing your boundaries means you make mistakes. And when you make a mistake, it's okay. That's over. Let's move on to the next one. And he exuded that. And you're talking about that positive energy. It's like, he could really crash and burn on something, but then the next minute he's amazing you again. And it's not allowing those things to get into your head. You see that in the sports world. As much as I dislike him because he played for Michigan, Tom Brady, being a GOAT, that's what it means, that even when things are not going your way, you still find a way to make things work. And it's by just keeping present. And, as a player yourself, you've been in these high profile situations. How do you manage that? I mean, how do you keep your head in the game, knowing that that it's easy to keep score for yourself, and it's easy for other people to be keeping score on you. How do you keep your head straight and keep yourself in the game?
I think I think for me, it's really tied into this, this spiritual journey that I've been on, and just like I said before, just trying to stay as much as possible in the moment. And when I, if and when I do make a mistake, trying not to let it affect from, okay, it's gone, it's in the past, or and trying not to think ahead to whatever, oh my gosh, I have to play the intro to You're Still a Young Man, and I'm only 40 minutes into the set and my chops already feel like, trying not to let my head go there. And that's not something that comes naturally for me. My natural default is to do one or the other, is to either focus all my mental energy on a mistake I just made, or worry too much about something that's going to happen in the future. It's taken a lot of work and a lot of effort that is definitely spiritually based to be able to stay as focused on the moment as I possibly can, and stay as grounded in right now as I possibly can. That's really, and it's been a journey, and there's some days I'm better at it than other days, without a doubt. But overall, I'd say for the last 20 years, that's probably played the biggest role in like what you said, being able to handle some fairly high profile situations, musical situations.
Yeah. So obviously that is an important thing. But if a young player were to come up to you and say, what's something that I could do? What's a practical approach that I could take? What's an exercise I could do? What's whatever? What's a way that I could start to develop that skill? What would you suggest them to do?
I would suggest take the horn out, put the mouthpiece in, set the horn on your lap, close your eyes, and breathe slowly through your nose and count your breaths. Try to count from 1 to 10 without losing your place. You'd be surprised how difficult it is. And I know I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to this hypothetical beginning trumpet player, or student, or, even like an experienced trumpet player who may have never meditated. And just count your breaths from 1 to 10. And when you get to 10, start over again. And start to try to feel what the sensation of the breath feels like coming into your nose, and try to put as much of and if you feel your mind wandering to Clark study number 2, try to gently bring it back and just realize, okay, it's Clark study number 2. I'm going to let that go. I'm going to bring it back to the feeling of my breath. I'm going to bring it back to, I'm on the 3rd breath now. Now I'm on the 4th breath. And just do that for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes before you put the horn to your face. And you'd be amazed at what a difference doing that consistently. And that's really the key in any meditation practice. And I don't need to tell you this. That's, consistency. It's better to do 5 minutes consistently on a daily basis than it is to do, weekend warrior. I'm going to go do a 3-day Vipassana retreat on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then I'm going to come back and be all spiritual for the next 6 months. It doesn't, for me anyways, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
I have to. It's better for me to try to do a little bit every single day. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah.
And by doing that practice, you're training your mind to not necessarily, the extraneous thoughts are going to be there. They're going to come, but latching onto them and holding on to them and thinking that this thought is so important, I have to spend as much mental energy as possible. it takes training to be able to just say, okay, Clark study number 2, not thinking about it because I'm breathing right now. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just breathing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you pick the horn up, you realize, oh, wow. It's like there's a level of concentration and like I'm hearing stuff in my sound that I didn't hear before. Or, wow, I'm noticing my third finger is really, really slow. Maybe I should do something about that.
Yeah. Well, I did a couple of master classes on mindfulness for musicians over the pandemic, and
Cool.
that was one of the things that I talked to the kids about was, you know, everybody's got some sort of warm up routine. And, I asked the question, how many of you have a warm up ritual that you go through? And, everybody's, okay, well, what do you do? Well, I play long tones, or I play the lead pipe, or I do free buzzing. It's like, okay, great. So these are all physical warm ups. How many of you have a mental warm up that you go through before you play? And it was like crickets, but that's the thing is that getting your mind and your heart right, especially in terms of, I mean, all music, but I think especially in jazz, you have to have your head and your heart right, because your head is what's kind of driving the mechanism, but your heart, that's where the music comes from. The mind is just allowing you to do the mechanics. The heart is where that comes from. So if you can't get your head and your heart in sync, then your music is never going to be what it could be. So spending another 6 years working on out of Clark's and Arbans, yeah, it's going to give you the technical facility, but it's never going to clear your mind, get your mind out of the way of blocking what's in your heart from coming out. And I want to come back to the TOP thing in a bit, because one of my favorite bands, and I loved you as a lead player in that band. But I do want to, since we're kind of on that tip right now, I do want to talk about some of these spiritual concepts, because I think that musicians, because we have to tap into that deeper nature of ourselves, the thing that's greater than ourselves. I think that this is such a crucial part of taking the art to the next level, to the higher level. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about your spiritual journey and how that kind of came about, and the things that you have been able to implement in your life as a result of being open to this new stage of your being?
Sure, absolutely. And some of these things are things that I've never really had an opportunity or a platform to really share about, just simply because I've never really been asked in this kind of a forum. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about, my journey and some of this stuff. When I was very young, a woman who was drunk, she ran me over with a car, and she was, she dragged me 70 feet underneath her car before her delayed reaction time registered that she'd
Wow.
hit somebody, hit a child. And I probably should have died from the impact, but I didn't. And actually, I just had some minor bruising, and I was treated and released, I think, after something like 48 hours. But shortly after that experience, I started spending a lot of time like out in the woods. Like I said, I grew up in a very rural area, and it's beautiful. There's lots of woods, and it's a quarter of a mile from Lake Michigan. And there were, so I started spending a lot of time out in the woods, and I started feeling this sense of safety and protection out in the woods that I didn't feel in school. I definitely didn't feel like I belonged in school, not in that public school. And they found out I was Jewish, or half Jewish, and I came to school one day and there was a swastika on my locker from permanent marker, and I had a death threat. So school wasn't a safe place. never really talked about this before, but home wasn't really a safe place either. I grew up in an alcoholic home. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of trauma, neglect, things of that nature. So home didn't necessarily feel safe a lot of the time either. But the woods felt safe, and I felt connected to something, and I couldn't really put it into words, and I couldn't put a finger on it. And then, shortly after that, just like within a few years, I discovered music. And music gave me that same sort of sense of connection. But then a little further down the line, starting in college, I discovered that substances could also give me that sense of connection, and it did it really fast, and it did it really efficiently, and all of a sudden, that balance, that juggling act between, trying to get that from music and trying to get that from spiritual things and healthy things, gradually the substances won out, which happens in a lot of cases, unfortunately. Eventually, I got help, and I came into recovery in 2007. And once as we say in recovery, once we put the plug in the jug, once I stopped the substances, I was still left with this sense of needing to connect with something. And it was stat. I needed it quick, and music alone wasn't going to be able to do it. It wasn't going to be able to keep me sober and keep me clean. And so, I had this spiritual history from my father's side. My father was Jewish. He was from originally a observant community, a Litvak community, Lithuanian community in Chicago. Beginning of the last century, there were a lot of Lithuanian Jews that relocated. Most of them relocated into the United States, into the Chicago area. So my dad kind of came out of that environment. He had left the community and left the religion. He was no longer, he was culturally, he was a bagel Jew, he was a deli Jew, but he definitely he wasn't observant in any way, shape, or form. And my mother wasn't Jewish. So when I was kind of like spiritually shopping, I guess you could say, after I got sober, I'd already started dipping my feet into trying to learn a little bit about Judaism. And, the more I dipped my feet into it, the more I dipped my toes into it, the more it seemed to resonate with me, and it made sense to me. And it seemed to resonate with me on the same kind of level that little, 8-year-old boy running around barefoot in the woods was resonating with me in a way that nothing else seemed to resonate with me. So to kind of, try to tidy things up a little bit and wrap it up and put a bow on it. In 2011, I realized that Jewish observance was becoming very important to me because of certain and a specific type of Judaism was becoming important to me. And it was Torah observant, kind of from a Hasidic mystical sort of, standpoint. But, Torah observance was starting to become much more important to me. And I couldn't participate in a lot of the certain prayers and things because I was half Jewish, but on the wrong side. Judaism is passed down maternally, not paternally. So in 2011, I had a proper kosher Orthodox conversion. Gior is the Hebrew word for it. I became a Gior, and it's been a gradual kind of taking on of some of the rules and laws and things, some of the what we call halacha, the Jewish observance and there's been periods in my life where I've been more observant, periods where I've kind of become less observant. But the older I get, and certainly I would have to say that this pandemic for the last year has definitely kind of created an opportunity for me to explore this even closer and even more so. And as I get older, it becomes more and more apparent to me that this is my life's path. And this is my spiritual journey, and it becomes more and more home for me. more than anything else. And, it's definitely been a huge part of my sobriety. Like I said, you can, if you got a drunken horse thief and you get him sober, you still got a horse thief. That's kind of the thinking. You take the alcohol away from the addict, and they still have to have something. And for a lot of us, the only thing that ends up working is a spiritual solution.
Right.
Because ultimately, my problem wasn't the drugs and the alcohol. That was my solution.
Right.
My problem was sobriety, was myself, was me. That was my problem. You take the drugs and the alcohol away, I'm still left with me. Right. So I have to have something that's going to connect me, ground me spiritually. And that's the beautiful thing about the 12-step program is it's a huge wide tent for just about any kind of spiritual path you want to choose. And you can even choose, you can get on it and decide one path isn't working or whatever. You can switch paths or whatever. But as long as you have a spiritual solution, as long as you find some kind of spiritual solution, still to this day, 12-step recovery has the best track record of keeping people like me clean and sober. And I'm grateful beyond words for having that in my life.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. And I know that's it's societally it's a problem. I mean, it's not just within the music industry, but there definitely seems to be a strong correlation between people that are of an artistic bent and substance abuse. And I have my own theories about that. One of which is that, like I was saying earlier about, you're trying to get your head out of the way so that what's in your heart can come out. And I think a lot of times that's what creates this need or this dependency on the rapid solution, which is, I can't play well unless I have, a couple of drinks, and you get a little buzz on, or you need to smoke a joint, or I need to, do an 8-ball or whatever it is. It just begins. It's like, well, that's the only way that I can function. That's the only way I can get my mind to quiet so that I can do my art. And then I see that there's that big correlation between people that go down that path, and they either self-destruct on that path, which we obviously seen a lot, or they realize that was the ends to a mean. It wasn't that they needed that, but there was something else that was missing in their life, and they find that through their spirituality. We were talking like earlier about Coltrane, and I think Coltrane is kind of that classic example of, hey, I was going down this path and I'm looking for something to fill a hole in my life. And I wasn't really filling the hole. I was just numbing myself from the pain that hole was causing. And it's through my spiritual pursuits that I'm actually able to fill that hole. So, that's really powerful stuff. And I hope that if someone is listening out there that is struggling with any type of addiction, certainly listen to what Mike has to say. And if you know somebody who is in a 12-step program, talk to them. Talk to somebody who, find a counselor. There's no shame in having the problem. The shame is not from having the problem. The shame should actually come from not just taking the steps to do something about it. You've got the power to do it.
Or worse than shame. Jails, institutions, or death. That ends up being the last house for a lot of people like us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you talked about why it seems like so many artists and so many, musicians or whatever we seem to be hardwired for this. And I agree with your theory. And I would also, offer up that there's a rabbi who he's an Orthodox Hasidic rabbi who I follow quite a bit, who part of his life's work is to help addicts and alcoholics. And he published a book a number of years ago, which was huge for me. It's called God of Our Understanding. His name is Rabbi Shais Taub, and he's got a lot of YouTube, videos where he's talking about addiction and recovery. And he puts it best, I think. He kind of, in terms of explaining why it seems like people like us seem to have a propensity for this. He coined a phrase in his book he calls a spiritual canary. And what it is, if you're familiar with the canary in the coal mine,
Right.
Back in the day, they would open up a new mine shaft. They would take a canary down with them, and the canary tweet tweet tweet. Everything's good, and then a few minutes later, oh look, the canary's taking a nap in the bottom of the cage. No, that means there's toxic gas. Everybody out. The canary is not a toxicologist. I'm completely, totally, stealing all of Rabbi Taub's licks right now. Okay. The canary is not a toxicologist. The canary is just more sensitive to this kind of, negative stimuli, in this case, toxic gas. For whatever reason, so all human beings have this desire, this need to want to connect. I think that's one of the reasons why all the isolation from the pandemic over the last year has been so devastating, because, all human beings have this need to connect to something, either another human being or a power greater than themselves, But for whatever reason, there's some people who are even more sensitive to that disconnection. One time Rabbi Taub was giving a talk to some educators and some parents, I think, and it was about a third grade class. And they asked him if he could look at a third grade class and predict who the possible alcoholics or addicts would end up being, okay? And he said, no, I can't. Nobody can predict that. But I can tell you this, it's probably not the person who you think. It's probably not the kid who's being really disruptive, who's being angry all the time and hitting other kids. It's probably the kid in the back who's really quiet, who's writing poetry or drawing pictures. That's probably the kid who might end up as an addict or alcoholic, So he calls people like me, people like us, spiritual canaries. We're maybe a little bit more sensitive to that feeling of disconnect. And we have to have something that connects us, whether it's music, whether it's drugs or alcohol, whether it's gambling, process behavior, whatever. We have to have something. We have to find some kind of spiritual program, hopefully. So, and I think a lot of artists and musicians and people who are creative have that pre-wiring, that makes us sensitive to, that enables us to be able to create art, but it also gives us this incredible. Rabbi Taub, talks about it. It's existential angst. Existence hurts. Mm-hmm. Being here and being separate from the everything, from the one, hurts, and we have to find something that's going to numb that, that's going to take that away. And a lot of us end up in the arts as a creative way of trying to express that.
Yeah, wow, that's really deep. I like that. I have to look into that a lot more. So. And we're gonna lighten it up just a little bit, folks. So it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. But we'll come back to this in a minute. So, but I'll
just preemptively say an Eric Miyashiro number 2 and an Eric Miyashiro number 1 stock Yamaha mouthpiece, and right now an EM 8340 EM trumpet.
All right, you're jumping the gun. We're going to get to that in a minute.
I thought maybe that's how we were gonna.
Yeah, we're going. So I want to flip back. We were kind of just at that stage where you were with TOP, and a great run with that band. You guys were. I mean, the band is still bringing it. But that was a really phenomenal band. Like you said, you and Adolfo. You played like one person. I was always so impressed in how you guys worked together and the sound that you got. But I remember having a conversation with Adolfo about he was talking about the transition from coming from the North Texas upbringing, playing with Maynard and that sort of stuff, the jazz track, and then being in that band, which is funky, and having the conversation. I think he said it was with Garibaldi about the difference between when you're playing jazz, the subdivision is basically you fill in the eighth, and it's like, no, I mean you got to feel the 16th in this kind of a groove, and was like, wow, that's really interesting. So, when you made that transition into playing with Tower Power and playing that kind of music, and especially that lead book, which is not it's not the lead book like playing lead with Maynard's band or with Buddy's band or something like that. There's kind of the different demands, but it's still a blow, man. It's and the ability to just be so accurate, both in terms of time and pitch, and just the making sure you had the right amount of grease on each note. What was the hardest part of your transition for that?
Well, again, thank you so much for the kind words. I really loved playing with Adolfo, and we definitely played really well together. Um, you know, I think one of the best lessons I got was in making that transition was David Garibaldi has absolutely huge ears, and he hears everything that's going on the stage, almost like on a psychic level. And for the first couple of months that I was on the band, he would hear things where I wasn't quite gelling, and he would very gently, in sound check the next day, pull me aside and say, okay, well, here's play that lick on Soul Vaccination. And again, this is something that when I've gone and done clinics with students, I'll talk about. This is something that I never would have learned until I joined Tower of Power, was the difference between playing music that is completely internalized and memorized, and looking at music on a page. Something happens when you take the page away, that to your ears, that they open up, and all of a sudden you're able to hear things on a different level, that even if you have the music memorized, for some reason, especially I think as a horn player, because most of us grow up learning to play our instrument at the same time we're learning how to read music, as opposed to a lot of rhythm section players who, they might start learning how to play their instrument, by ear in the guitar first, or in the garage first, and then learn how to read music. So our ears, I don't think they develop the same way. And so first of all, as a prerequisite, I had, we're talking about music that I had already internalized and memorized. So David will pull me aside and sound check the next day, and he would say, play this section on Soul Vaccination. We're just going to loop it. And he would have me stand right next to his drum set. And he would tell me, I want you to watch and see what it is that I'm doing on my drum set while you're playing. And it became very apparent to me that the horn section, in a lot of musical situations in Tower of Power, that the horn section was really kind of an extension of David Garibaldi. That we were almost like a pad that he could hit and create this wall of harmony. And so it was really important that I could visualize and could see what he was doing, and then reproduce that and play exactly with him as much as possible. And the only way that I was able to do that was by these, like I said, for the first couple of months, getting together with him. He would say, okay, here's what I heard last night. Play this section, we'll loop it, watch what I'm doing on the drums. I would watch him, and we'd just loop it until I would get it right. And when that would happen, and it was be really, really close, but when it would completely, totally lock in, it would be like one of those, have you ever seen those magic eye books?
Yeah.
Where it's like a bunch of just, weird squiggly line. And then you look at it long enough, and then all of a sudden the 3D image, it would be like that. All of a sudden the 3D image pops in, and it's like, oh, wow. Okay. I feel it. I hear it, and that was, I think, the best experience I could have had to get me out of, like what you said, big band mode into playing in the Tower of Power band. And I've never experienced it. I played in some great bands since that covered Tower of Power, but there isn't anything that, and I think a lot of it is just because the charts are in front of you.
Yeah.
And even if they're 100% accurate and 100% right, it's not going to be the same. The horn players aren't going to react to it the same unless they don't have the music. They have the music completely internalized, and they're really, really listening almost on a psychic level, not to get all ooh, but they're really kind of listening on that next level kind of listening, and then they can fit their part into where it needs to fit in precision,
Yeah. Well, yeah, it definitely is interesting because I've played in plenty of bands. Actually, I'm rehearsing right now for a gig. Believe it or not, I have a gig coming up.
I'm
What?
sorry, you have a what?
Yeah, it's this thing. It's an ancient tradition where musicians would get together and they would go out and they would play for exposure bucks.
And
But
people would like actually listen?
yeah, sometimes they would listen.
Wow.
It's really odd though because we're still dealing with COVID restrictions, and bars are creating some sort of pivots. So there's no dancing, which is kind of interesting when you're playing with a dance band. I'm not bitching because hey, it's a chance to get out on the stage again. But yeah, so creating these pivots. But one of the tunes that they threw in was a TOP tune, and I'm kind of been rehearsing it and listening to myself. And so as I'm doing that, I'm keeping in mind the words that Adolfo spoke to me, and then, what you were saying right now is like trying not just reading the chart, but trying to feel where things come together. And it's not merely trying to synchronize things. And I think sometimes that's what happens. It's like, okay, well, I want to play this pattern and it's just got to be synced up with the beat. But it's coordinating what you're doing, which is a different feeling between kind of making sure things are happening at the same time as opposed to coordinating the actions and making sure that they're symbiotic and not just occurring at roughly the same moment. And I think that as I go back and I listen, because I was listening to it was So Much Oil in the Ground, and I'm listening to the original recording, and then I'm listening to like the recording from the 40th anniversary sessions, and kind of listening to some of the things that are different, but also I'm trying to listen to phrasing, I'm trying to listen to some articulations and stuff like that. And it's like, even though there's these subtle variations, it's just that the way things just fit together so seamlessly. And what you said made complete sense. It's like being a pad for the drummer. It's not like the horn section is over here and the drummer's over here. It's like this is all one organic thing that's occurring, and that is magic. And it's so funny because I think it takes a level of releasing your ego to be able to do that, because you can't be like, well, I'm the lead trumpet player, man. You guys are all gonna follow me. You've got to be able to look at the greater good and how what you do affects that. So, man,
No, you're absolutely right. And I think if I, not keeping score on myself, I think if I could go back and talk to 30-year-old Iron Mike Bogart, I wish I could tell him that I think I did still, I let too much of my own ego come into play. I hung over too much. I didn't play certain notes quite short enough. There was still too much of me in it. Obviously I was doing okay. I was able to stay on the band for 9 years and I didn't get fired. But, I listened back to recordings, especially live recordings, and I just kind of like, oof, a little bit too much Mike in that. And because it is like what you said, it is power is very much like an organic single cell amoeba organism kind of thing, and you kind of have to get absorbed into it, and then everybody kind of works in sync, and you do definitely have to check your ego at the door, and everybody has their part to play, and no one part is any more important or any less important than another part. It's all part of the same thing, and yeah, that's something very unique that you don't really find in any bar bands, that I've ever played with, or wedding bands,
Yeah.
even if they're covering Tower of Power.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said about the longevity.
Well, I was just about to say, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to
Yeah,
get this pointed before I forget
yeah,
it. I think a big, huge, possibly the most important part of that equation is the fact that we had, the time I was on the band, we had David Garibaldi, Doc Kupka, um, Emilio Castillo, and Francis Rocco Prestia, which was the core of the band from the beginning.
right.
You know, Rocco, rest in peace, man. Um, that really, I think having the core of the band um, for that amount of time, and the energy, kind of emanating out to the rest of us, the newbies or whatever, is a really, really important part of why that band sounds the way that it sounds,
Yeah,
without a doubt.
yeah. Well, if you're playing commercial music, if you're playing cover bands and stuff like that, and you're a trumpet player, you're going to run across some of those charts. And I just, God bless you for playing that stuff, night in, night out, and not just, oh my gosh, I gotta play these two TOP charts in the third set. No, no, you're playing TOP charts all night long. So that that takes a lot of endurance, my friend, a lot of endurance, I'm sure. So, when you go from, but you did your run with them, obviously, uh, and then you transitioned back into the Navy. So when you transition back into the Navy, what was the calling? What did you feel tugging at your heart and your spirit to pull you back in that direction?
Well, at the time that I made that decision, I I had already been on Tower of Power for 9 years, and 7 years of it as an active alcoholic, and then the last 2 years as a sober member of the band. And I I kind of had this feeling, this sense that, I never I kept I kind of kept tabs on the Navy music program, and I never burned any bridges. I was very careful. I kept in touch with Navy musicians, and I definitely kind of, whenever we would go out and we would do clinics with the Tower of Power horn section, and they would ask me about my education, I'd talk about how much I actually learned as a Navy musician. It really gave me an opportunity to play a lot of different styles in a professional setting, and to get a regular steady paycheck for it every 2 weeks. When I left, I at the time, I certainly didn't have eyes to come back in anytime soon. But by the time I'd been on Tower of Power for 9 years, I'd been on the road for 12. And it was really hard on my first family. I ended up, and a lot of it was due to my behavior, but a 17-year marriage ended with my daughter's mom, I just was looking for more stability, like I said, I kind of kept my finger on the pulse of the Navy music program. And then I found out about an opening in one of the premier bands. Military bands have, in the United States, we have two tiers of bands. You have the fleet bands or the field bands. Then you have premier organizations like the United States Navy Band in Washington, D.C., the Naval Academy Band in Annapolis, Maryland, the President's Own for the Marines,
All right.
and those auditions aren't they only audition for a spot when a spot comes up, if somebody either retires or gets out or whatever, and they're pretty rare. So the audition standards are a little bit higher from the fleet band program that I was in before. So anyhow, a spot opened up at the United States Naval Academy, and I had an opportunity to come back in. And I thought, if I'm going to do it, now's the time for me to do it. I only have to do another 10 years, and I'll be able to retire with all my benefits. I'll have a wonderful medical plan. I'll have incredible education benefits. And it just made a lot of sense. And I'll have some kind of stability. I'll have a little more stability than being on the road 320 or 200, sorry, at the time I left Tower of Power, we were averaging about 250 days on the road a year. So, you know, I made the call and I decided I wanted to come back in the Navy. And fortunately, I could pass a urinalysis test because I was clean.
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah, and I came back in and I did a couple of years, 3 years with the United States Naval Academy Band, amazing musicians, and then you know, then I found out about a program that the Navy had where they would send people to school to become drug and alcohol counselors. And you know, like I said, my spiritual program was becoming more a bigger part of my life, and wanting to be of service, and you know, having this sense that I was given this incredible gift of sobriety, and I kind of feel like I have an obligation to try to pass it on. And so I after my 3 years at the United States Naval Academy, I applied for the school. I got accepted and I graduated and started working as a substance abuse counselor for the Navy. Wow. And I did that for a few years. Well, no, sorry. I did that for just under 2 years. And I probably would have finished out my career. But then we had a family tragedy take place that was directly related to the work that I was doing. And I at that point, I didn't feel as confident in my ability to be a counselor, especially for this demographic. A lot of our patients were folks coming back from combat that were dual diagnosed with combat PTSD as well as substance dependence. And they needed the best of the best. And I did not feel on top of my game after going through this tragedy. I needed some time to heal for myself. So I took myself out of counseling and was really grateful that the Navy music program had a spot for me. And I wasn't going to finish out my career chipping paint on a ship somewhere. And so I was able to get back into a Navy band. And that's how I ended up, you know, full circle back at Great Lakes, where I auditioned for the Navy back in 1988. Wow. And I was at Great Lakes for a little over 4 years and hit the 20-year mark. As we say in the military, dropped my papers and retired. Yeah. And then that led you to the Royal Academy in London, where you are for the moment, because we have another pivot coming up. So, you know, it's so interesting, you know, like you said, you know, it's kind of that full circle, starting at Great Lakes, going all the way around, you know, with your commercial playing, back into the Navy, your substance abuse counseling, back to music, coming into another degree, Royal Academy, and then now you're transitioning back into counseling. Is that correct? That is correct. Yeah, so I retired from the Navy band at Great Lakes in August of 2019, and before I retired, I was thinking, okay, I got all this money I could go back to school with, right? And I never finished my bachelor's. That was another thing that I always felt like I had left undone. And I thought, why don't I go back to school? So in my first tour with Maynard Ferguson's band, we played a 2-week stint at Ronnie Scott's club here in London. And I absolutely fell in love with the city of London. And I promised myself that if I ever had an opportunity to come here for an extended period of time, I would take it. So I kind of put out a little blurb on Facebook, and I was like, look, if somebody was thinking about studying jazz in London or rather in the UK, I think I'd meet it even more general. Where would be some good places to go and study jazz? Who has, you know, great jazz programs? And within 48 hours, I got a private message from Nick Smart, who's the head of jazz programs here at the Royal Academy of Music. Private messaged me and said, "Hey, Mike, you might not remember me, but we met. You played on Maynard Ferguson's band at Ronnie Scott's. I was at those gigs, and I remember when I followed your career on Tower of Power. How'd you be interested in coming to the Royal Academy of Music?" And because I think I'd put on there that I never finished my undergraduate, I never finished my bachelor's. He said, we based on your professional experience, we would be able to waive the undergraduate requirements and bring you in as a master's student. And I was like, where do I sign up?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that happened. And I've been over here. I'm using my education benefits, we call it the post 9/11 GI Bill that I earned from my service time. It's paying for my tuition, and I have a living stipend. But I'm already starting to look ahead, right, to graduation, which is coming up in the end of June. And obviously COVID, right? It's had a really challenging impact on live music, just trying to think ahead to, okay, what are some other things I can do? I have a pension from the Navy, and I have a disability rating from the Veterans Administration. I have income coming in. I'm very blessed. I'm very lucky. I don't necessarily have to work, but I want to work.
Right.
What I mean, I want to be of service, and I love making music and being able to give that to people and being able to go out and perform. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. I mean, it's starting to trickle in a little bit by little bit, but what can I do now? And so, as a veteran, we have certain other benefits. One of the benefits that we have is we have what's called veterans preferences for federal hiring positions. I put together a federal resume. This was like last month. Not even really necessarily thinking. I kind of did it more as an exercise because I kind of was thinking, okay, ahead to after I graduate and I have my degree, I could put together a federal resume and like swamp the federal job market with my resume. But I kind of wanted to get some practice at it. So I put together a federal resume. I went ahead, I found a couple of jobs that looked interesting. I blasted the resume out. The very first job that caught my eye was a job in counseling at a brand new residential treatment center for Native American and Alaska Native youths. It immediately caught my eye. It was the first place that I dropped the resume at, not even thinking that I would get a call because I haven't been in counseling since 2014,
Right.
and so anyhow, long story short, they called. And they set up a Skype interview, and I had a great Skype interview with the director of the new facility, and they recommended me for hire. So at that point I was like, well, when would you be able to hold the position? Because they were like, we're looking to have patients start coming in April and May. So we're kind of hoping to have everybody on board by the end of March. And I said, well, here's my deal. I'm doing this master's program in London. Would you hold the position open for me for a couple of months till I graduate? They said, no, we couldn't do that. We need to have our positions filled. So at that point, I was prepared to turn the job down and just kind of wait and see what would happen. But I had one more thing I could try. Because we've been doing so much of this remote, anyways, because of COVID, we haven't had any in-person classes or rehearsals since I guess it was November, December. Right. Everything's been online. So I asked Nick Smart, the head of jazz programs, if there was a possibility. If I told him what had come up, and if I took the job, would I be able to finish my program remotely? Without any hesitation, he said, yeah, we can work around this. We can make this happen for you. So I decided to take the job.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, as we kind of bring everything into focus again, that, there are so many opportunities that exist. And, well, first of all, you're never going to know where they're leading unless you take them. And, when you get your head out of your way, sometimes, and you just kind of go with your heart and follow the still small voice that we all have. Yeah. I can't remember where I read it. It was somewhere that if you follow whatever whether you call it the voice of the higher power or your intuition or whatever you want to call it, that it rarely, if ever, leads you wrong. When you really follow those voices, that you always end up being where you need to be. It's when we start trying to parse things out and rationalize and intellectualize, that's what gets us into trouble most of the time. So, I think that obviously, then when we have the ability to look back on our lives, we can see the patterns, we can see the sense that things make, and so it just seems like you've had these opportunities that have come up, and because they seem to fall in line, and when they do, you follow your heart, and it's put you in these wonderful positions where each opportunity has led you to a new one. And I think this newest one is going to be a great one for you because I mean, obviously I love music and all the things that music can do for people, but there's something about that counseling and that making that level of dramatic impact, tangible impact on the lives of those who, especially in this situation, who not only just we all need the help, but this is an underserviced portion of our community, and so I certainly applaud you for taking that step because it's not an easy job, but it is certainly a rewarding job in terms of our contribution to the greater good. So thanks for being that guy.
Well, thank you, Jose. I appreciate that very much.
Well,
Yeah, it's outside of making music, the period of time that I've spent working in mental health has been the most rewarding on a slightly different level than making music. And it's given me much more. It's given me much more than I feel I've given to it. And it's and I don't necessarily. I don't feel like my decisions and the pivot points that you talk about. It's not necessarily me making those decisions. I feel like I'm being guided, like you said, that still small voice. And it's funny that you use that phrase because that actually comes from one of the Old Testament Jewish prophets who was Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. And he talks about the voice of God not always coming in a huge thunderous voice, but it's that still small voice that's in the back of our head, the voice of conscience that's usually how God speaks to it. At least that's how God speaks to me.
Right. Well, that's definitely the ones that work for me. All right. Well, we've got two segments that we need to roll through here before we can wrap up for today, and they are for all of the first one is definitely for all of our trumpet player gearheads out there, which we all are closet gearheads. It's a segment called Gear Up, and this is where we're going to talk about your gear just for a few moments. So you mentioned earlier that you're playing the EMs. Is that correct?
Yep. Over the years, I've kind of vacillated between a stock Bobby Shoe 8310Z, well, even before that, a 6310Z, and the EM model. As my playing has, I use the EM model on and off between the 8310Z while I was on Tower of Power, and there were a lot of things about it that I loved for that gig, but there were also some things that I felt like I was just able to respond a little bit better using the 8310Z for the Tower of Power lead book. I felt like I needed a little bit more resistance, and I felt like the 8310Z was a little bit more efficient than the 8340, than the Eric Miyashiro model. Since then, obviously those demands aren't on me. There's a quality to the sound of the 8340. Obviously a lot of it has to do with the diameter of the bell, the big bell that it has. There's just a warmth and quality to the sound that and a color palette that's available that I don't necessarily find on the 8310Z, the Bobby Shoe model. Sorry, Bobby. For jazz playing, for small group stuff, I'm finding that I'm really loving going back to playing an 8340, the Miyashiro model, and it works great with a smaller mouthpiece, like I kind of mentioned already. Spoiler alert before. A lot of the playing that I do is on a Miyashiro number 2, Yamaha. When I gotta really crank out the lead playing, I play on a Miyashiro number 1, and then sometimes I'll practice on a old my original Bach 3C that I still have.
Mhm.
And I do, I do a fair amount of practicing and playing on the 3C as well. But most of the majority of the playing that I do is going to be on the Miyashiro #2, and everything is stock. I don't play anything that's like been tweaked or messed with or custom.
So is the Miyashiro model, is that fairly close to the diameter of a 3C?
No, it's not at all. Yeah, it's much narrower, much smaller. It's
If
probably closer. The diameter, if I had as a frame of reference, I guess probably closer to something like a 10.
Yeah,
A Bach
okay.
10,
Yeah. I think I remember seeing something about 10, 10 and a half. And then but Bobby's is somewhere in that 3-ish range, if I'm not mistaken.
You mean his jazz model?
Yeah.
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 The Yamaha Jazz, the Bobby Shoe Jazz model, which I also, I have a couple of those that I like to play as well. The diameter and the cup volume it's much closer to a Bach 3C. I feel like the backbore and the throat might be a little bit more efficient, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Don't quote me.
I can't promise anything. So anyway, but in terms of gear, I mean, one of the things that I do like to do with this is, not just find out what you're playing, but more of the whys, and particularly in terms of when you have a student or a player who's looking to make a change in gear. A lot of times they're looking at, well, what are the pros playing? I want to play exactly what Bobby's playing. I want to play what Eric's playing. I want to play what Michael's playing. But it's not so much the horn, but it's what the horn does. Like you're saying, the color palette and stuff like that. So if you're going to give some advice to someone who's looking to gear up a little bit, what recommendations would you give them of processes and starting points?
The first thing I would mention, if they're playing on a beginner model or intermediate model, or let's say they're playing on a beginner model and they're trying to justify the cost of a professional model versus an intermediate model, I would say go ahead and invest up. Think long term, think future, think you might be doing this for a while. Because you never know, you could get bit by the bug like me. So, if you're trying to make a decision between an intermediate model and professional model, say go ahead, spring, have the extra money and go ahead and spring for the professional model. Then I would look at, all right, what are they already playing, and what kind of success do they already have with the equipment that they have, and do they really need to make a change? Is it really necessary? And if it's something that they're really, really excited about, even if they, I can speak from personal experience. I might sound really, really good on some equipment, but it might get a little bit stagnant after a while. And maybe, something comes like Eric came out with his model trumpet. And I was like super, super excited about trying Eric's trumpet, and it kind of got me fired up again for the trumpet thing. And so maybe, this might be an opportunity for a young musician to get fired up about their instrument. So yeah, I would look at what they're playing, what kind of success are they already having on their equipment now, and without making too drastic of a change in how their body and physiology is going to have to readjust, what can we get that player into that's next level? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes
obviously, and I'm not trying to plug Yamaha, but they've been fantastic to me over the years, and I happen to think Bob Malone is one of the greatest minds as far as taking in the consideration and the input from artists and from other players, and being able to draw on that input and figure out ways to make, whatever changes need to be made with the piece of brass tubing itself to be able to make that happen, to be able to make that a reality. And not necessarily, and again, let's talk about ego, not taking his own ego out of it, and not saying, okay, you know what, this is my horn. If you don't like it, piss off.
Yeah.
But what does the artist want? What does the trumpet player want? What kind of sounds and colors do they want available to them? And how do I make this piece of inert brass material from the earth be able to create that sound that the artist is hearing in their head? And I happen to think Bob Malone is one of the best at doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, success speaks volume, and there are so many great players that are playing those horns, various horns, and everyone has positive things to say about Bob. So Bob, if you're listening, I want you on the show. And
yeah, definitely. That would be a great hang.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maybe we need to get the Yamaha group together. So I'll put that together. So here's our final portion of the show, and this is a rapid fire round, which is brought to us by our good friends at Robinson's Remedies. This is Robinson's Remedy rapid fire round. Do you know Kenny Robinson?
We haven't met personally before, at least to my knowledge.
Yeah.
I always have to ask that because there were a lot of years there where I wasn't quite in the right mind. I met a lot of people that I don't necessarily remember. To my knowledge, we haven't met personally, but I know of his products, and I've had correspondence with him.
Yep. So this is brought by Kenny and Richard, and of course we're talking about Walter earlier. Walter's their spokesperson. So man, the stories about Walter. Anyway,
they're all true.
So this is a series of questions that are going to be all over the place, and I just want your quickest answer to these. I mean, if you feel like taking longer, it's up to you, but just try not to think about them too long. And here we go. Who's the biggest influence on your life that is not a trumpet player?
Bill W., Bill Wilson, and Dr. Bob.
All right. What is your favorite book?
Tanakh, which is an acronym for the Hebrew Holy Scriptures.
All right. What's the worst movie you've ever seen?
Oh, gosh. It's the worst movie I've ever seen. Man, that's a tough one. I don't know, because every time I go into I watch a movie, I have such great expectation. I want it to be fantastic. I walk away from it going, there was a lot of good stuff about that movie. Can I pass?
You can pass. You can call the lifeline if you want. Well, this you may have already answered this question. If you weren't a trumpet player, what would you want to be?
A counselor, therapist.
All right. What's your favorite drink?
Water.
You could have a dinner party and invite any 3 living people, anyone in the world, any 3 people in the world. Who would you want to have at that dinner party?
Barack Obama, Rabbi Shays Taub, and a British comedian named Stuart Lee.
Okay. You got to have a nice balance there.
Yeah.
All right. And you're going to have 3 additional chairs at that party, and you can invite any 3 people from history.
Sigmund Freud, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, Golda Meir.
Okay. Lacquer plated or raw?
Lacquer.
What is your favorite quote?
Don't keep score on yourself. Don't keep score on your bandmates.
All right. What's your greatest fear?
Can I answer that with a quick story?
Sure.
There was a Hasidic Rebbe named Zusha, and he had a lot of followers, and this was in the 19th century. And he was on his deathbed, and he started weeping, and all his followers were around him. And they asked him why he was weeping and why he was scared of judgment. And he said to his followers, I don't want you to think that I'm scared because judgment is going to ask me, Reb Zusha, why weren't you more like Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our father? Or why weren't you more like Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, the lawgiver? My greatest fear is that I die and I get up and the heavenly tribunal asks me, Reb Zusha, why weren't you more like Reb Zusha? So I think one of my greatest fears is getting to the end of the road and being asked, why weren't you more like Michael Bogart?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that one. I love that one. There's actually a guy who I follow his business podcast a lot, and he talks about his greatest fear is getting to heaven and being introduced to the man that he was destined to be, and not recognizing that person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that same kind of concept, you know. So yeah, that's cool. All right, what aspect of trumpet playing do you feel is the most overrated?
High notes.
That was quick. No second thoughts on that one. What aspect do you think is the most underrated?
Low notes. No, I'm kidding. Fundamentals. Yeah, just basic fundamentals and good trumpet sound. I don't think it gets enough attention. I think that and unlike in the past, now this is something that I've kind of gone off on a couple of times in when I've done master classes. I'll listen to a recording from the 1950s, right? I'll listen to a recording of Maynard Ferguson, and I'll listen to a recording of Bud Herseth playing the beginning of Mahler's Fifth Symphony. And the difference in sound quality between Maynard Ferguson playing in the middle register and Bud Herseth playing the beginning of Mahler's Fifth Symphony isn't that much. Today, there's like this huge idea that I'm a lead trumpet player, so I have to sound like this, or I'm a jazz player and I have to sound like this, or I'm a classical player and I have to sound like, it didn't there just used to be either you had a good trumpet sound or you had a bad trumpet sound. If you had a bad trumpet sound, you didn't get hired. If you had a good trumpet sound, you got hired. So for me, the most underrated aspect that doesn't get enough focus is on how do you create a good trumpet sound, regardless of the genre, regardless of what you're playing.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. You can go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about music. What would it be?
Don't take it so seriously. It's not rocket surgery.
All right. And while you're back there, you're going to give yourself one piece of advice about life.
Don't drink.
Okay. And final question for you. What do you want your legacy to be?
That I was a mensch.
If you don't know what a mensch is, look it up. Google it. Michael, this was absolutely fantastic. This is everything I had hoped this time would be and more. And I really look forward to getting to know you much better over the coming years. Have certainly admired your work from afar, but the more I've gotten to know you as a person, you're a rare breed, my friend. So thank you for all your contributions and the continued work that you're going to be doing to make the world a little bit better place.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jose. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for having such a great platform to, explore something other than, what mouthpiece do you play and how do you play high notes?
Yeah, I love Bobby's answer to that, when he said, when somebody asks me what mouthpiece I play, I say a trumpet mouthpiece. So that's a great answer. But anyway, man, I really, really appreciate it. And I know that your website is under construction at this point. I know you've got some, even though you're going to be doing the counseling thing more full time, that you still have lots of music to create and to produce. And so there is a link to your website in the show notes. So just keep checking back with Michael and keep tabs on what he's doing, because the man has got a lot to say, both through his horn and through his actions. So please help support him in as many ways as you can. So as always, thanks for joining the hang, and peace and slide grease. We out. Hey, thank you so much for hanging with us today. This podcast is all about creating connection through our mutual love for the trumpet life. I hope that you learned a few things about today's guest and had some laughs along the way. Don't forget to give us a review. We love those 5-star ratings. And please share this podcast with your friends. We want to see our hang grow for show. Have a suggestion for a future topic or a guest? Hit me up at thetrumpetgurus@gmail.com. Our opening theme was written and performed by Lexi Signor, and all other music comes courtesy of The Greatest Funeral Ever. So in the words of W.C. Handy, life is like a trumpet. If you don't put anything into it, you don't get anything out. So go out there and let your trumpet sound. And I'll see you at the next hang.